So joining us here today is Shawn Dewberry, who's an IT specialist and who's the man who blew the lid on online radio streaming stats. So he joins us here, and it's been a whole hoo-ha in the news in the last few days. There's been litigation and all sorts of allegations been floating around. Firstly, just give us in a nutshell, what did you investigate exactly?
Well, thank you for having me, Aki. The basic thing is I started investigating, I started noticing very high numbers of listenership stats coming from Bulls Visual Radio and from another radio station, 2 Oceans Vibe. Now, being involved in the online radio streaming industry myself through a small little startup called Interwebs Radio, I thought, how are these guys getting these listeners? So I started digging into their infrastructure and just having a look around to try and get some, knowledge about how they were actually going about getting such a high listenership. And when I started this investigation, I started seeing that all of the connections from all of their listeners were all going to a single location per radio station. And as it happened, when you looked in the HTML source and you saw the link, you could actually then see what's called a Shoutcast status page.
Yes.
And on that Shoutcast status page, it actually has an item listed there, which is the number of listeners that's counted. And so what was happening is the fact between what was published and what was showing on the Shoutcast status page was completely different.
So here we're talking, without making it sound too technical, is that here are these 2 radio stations claiming online that they have 60,000 listeners.
Yes.
Your research has found, how many listeners do they actually have?
In the region, for instance, Bulls Visual Radio would peak at about 2 p.m. or 2:30 p.m. at 200 to 300 listeners. And 2 Oceans Vibe, for instance, would peak around 40 or 50 listeners.
Yeah. So with fairness to these 2 radio stations, this is the information that they were led to believe that they had so many listeners. Would that be a fair assessment to make?
I think so, yes.
I mean, they're not into the business of streaming the audio. They get somebody else to do it. The other person says, this is how many streams you've got and this is how many listeners you have.
Yeah, understandably, they don't have the technical know-how to measure or understand the actual streaming components of their infrastructure. So they were obviously relying on their streaming provider, Net Dynamics, to then provide them with these statistics.
Okay, well that's very interesting. But I mean, it really highlights online streaming, radio in South Africa again. I mean, it certainly is not a very profitable business. That is very clear. There aren't too many people that listen to the internet, to radio stations via the internet.
Unfortunately, I think due to bandwidth cost in this country and just general connectivity, if you're going to be streaming to your cell phone and it's going to be costing you an out-of-bundle 2 rand a megabyte or something like that, it's not something that you're going to actually want to have. I mean, you don't want to go broke because you're listening to streaming radio. The difficulty is obviously with streaming radio, you're asking your listeners in effect to pay to listen to you. So you have to have a very valuable product, or bandwidth has to come down a large amount.
So when all these numbers came out, there was allegations. They were saying that Shawn, you've lost the plot. You got served legal papers. I see that My Broadband was involved as well. They had a great expose as well. You've subsequently were attacked by Bulls Radio, and you subsequently have had an apology issued by Bulls Radio. So just give us what's happened since then. Is there still legal action pending against you?
As I know, according to the My Broadband website, and they've spoken to Net Dynamics, there is no further legal action taking place against me. I think that they've realized that's probably not the correct route for them to go. So there's no further legal action against me at this stage.
And it's quite interesting that these numbers have come down so much from the proposed 60,000. There are all sorts of other things at play over here, where you have former advertisers who have been promised they're delivering to X amount of audience, and I'm sure that's going to be another issue altogether with these radio stations.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what the knock-on effects are going to be, but I think the nice thing is that it pops a little bit of a bubble in this. It pops the bubble because it gets everyone back to a reasonable level and a reasonable understanding of what this industry entails and what we can actually look at, and we can start looking where the real value in streaming radio lies.
Do you believe that there is value? Do you believe that there is a future business model for online streaming radio?
There is. I don't think you're going to make, perhaps not become a billionaire, but I think there is a large there's large potential for the medium because of the targeted nature of your listeners. You can identify their location. You can see exactly how long they're listening for. So you can get some very good metrics on who your listeners are. So there is a lot of value there that could be very valuable to advertisers in the niche aspects. So I think there is a future. At this stage, with bandwidth in the current situation, it's a little bit difficult to predict when this is going to happen. Some say 5 years. I like to believe within a year.
Shawn Dewberry, thank you very much, and congratulations on a great piece of journalism that you did there.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Well, there you go. That's Shawn Dewberry, who's the guy who broke the lid on online radio stats in South Africa. We look forward to the next chapter with an interesting angle to it.
Eyewitness News. In touch, in tune, and independent.